I feel like we can get started.
Yeah.
Already.
Suppose we should introduce ourselves?
Yeah.
Catalina, do you want to start since you're the...
Sure. I'm Catalina, and I am the director of Sound Spring sequence number 6. I'm in Tennessee at the moment at my parents' house.
My name is Em. I am a member of Lino Kino. Maya?
I'm Maya. I'm a member of Lino Kino as well, and I'll just take a second to say what Lino Kino is for anyone who's watching. So we're a Philadelphia-based media arts collective, and generally when it's not a pandemic, we're hosting screenings of different sorts around the city. But yeah, you can find us online.
I wanted to mention we have closed captioning available. I almost forgot. So if anyone would like closed captioning, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click it. If you're on a phone, you have to click more first, and then you can access the closed captioning from there. And also a quick organizational note is that we're going to be doing Q&A at the end, like the last 15 minutes or so. But if you have like questions or if you want to comment, feel free to kind of throw it in the chat and we'll like hold them till the end. But I just want to put that out there now. So maybe a good place for us to start and you know, kind of get settled is to talk a little bit about your relationship with Yellow Springs. Because that's kind of, you know, the root of the piece. So
Yeah. Well, I came to Yellow Springs to teach at Antioch College in 2018. It was my first full-time job teaching basically film and video. Can you guys still hear me? It started raining harder.
Yeah, you're good.
So I wanted to get to know the villagers better. It was this town where all the stories were interesting and progressive. It's sort of a progressive bubble, if you will, or, you know, people identify themselves as progressive for Ohio. And there are some very fascinating stories. So eventually I had this concept to make a lip-synced documentary, and my background is in theater, and I've really always been interested, not in just like showing a reality and that's it. Like I love watching those films, but the kinds of films that I've always been attracted to making have some sort of formal construct, stylization, even like song and dance, definitely a lot of style. So I knew I wouldn't make like a straight documentary. I'm also really interested in experimental film in addition to my theater background. And I was trying to think of a concept and also a way to get to know villagers better. And I thought that I could start with audio interviews and I could listen to different people's stories. And then I also have this background. One of my first films, I shot the whole film with certain actors, and actually other actors did the voices. And part of that was technical. I was shooting a film with German actors, and the film took place in English, and I didn't want anyone to have accents. But also, like, different genders played gender voices played different gender bodies. And I already knew that sound in film is a powerful thing, that, you know, in Hollywood films, sounds are actually created by things that are not what you see on screen. And even voices in horror movies often played by people much older than the person whose voice it's supposed to be for a certain effect. So I love the effect of a contrasting voice and image. And I thought, well, what if I create a film that uses all of the audio from these interviews, which would help me get to know the villagers better. But then the whole visual part is constructed, and we create these scenes together that are sort of choreographed. So the whole feature film is actually like an anthology. It's different chapters. Each chapter is its own story. It's one person telling about their own historical connection to Yellow Springs and maybe their ancestors, maybe themselves or a combination. And so this one is one of those stories. Now they do overlap a little bit, but in general, the stories are self-contained. So can you hear me still? Or is it a little loud with the rain?
Good. Yeah, I'm through.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so that's why, that's sort of how I got to Yellow Springs and sort of my background before that. Matt Morgan, who's a producer of the film, lent me this really awesome camera for my classes, and I was teaching with this camera. And I was like, whoa, I'd love to make a film with this camera too. And it's an 8K camera, so the image is just beautiful. Yeah. So there's also the contrast of the documentary form, which tends to have a rough visual aesthetic. But in this case, the visuals are very polished, not in terms of lighting or anything, but the static images are chosen very carefully by the cinematographer, Elena Dahl, who teaches art. She was a friend of mine, and I knew I needed, some collaborators to make a great film. Not that it's like finished yet, but this piece I think has turned out great. And so Elena, she teaches art, and she doesn't have a cinematography background at all. So all of this really beautiful cinematography is created by someone with a background in photography and visual arts. And this was her first time using a moving camera. And that was a really awesome collaboration as well. Yeah.
It's really, the shots feel so composed. Like they're really like, yeah, the intentionality really comes through.
Yeah, and sometimes you're working with your constraints, because like we didn't have a dolly, we didn't have a track, we didn't have some sort of stabilizer. So we knew that movement wasn't going to be, and another thing is if you take out the movement of the camera, then the work is a little bit more like photography. And I knew I was working with a photographer. So I thought, why don't we just take that as the first constraint? Although later we did do some shots in other parts of the film that are on a golf cart. So they are some moving. And I should say, I don't know if I described the whole film yet. It's a lip-synced documentary covering hundreds of years of history of this tiny village in Ohio. And the idea is to look at I've always been interested, and we'll see, how this pans out, but I've always been interested in all the layers of time. You go to the Museum of Natural History, you look at time and space. And so looking very specifically, but also over a really broad time span was really interesting to me.
It comes through even in, the particular sequence that we're talking about in Jalen's story. I would just love to hear a little bit more about your sort of interest in the lip sync approach. Like it seems like you came to that quickly once you decided to start with interviews and then build that more formal, composed visual landscape to go with that. But where does that idea originate?
Yeah. So even though I knew that the audio would be separate from the visual, there's many ways that could go, right? Like you could do sort of a voiceover narration where you hear someone's voice and you see different images. But for some reason, I'm interested in the presence of the interviewee just sitting across from you and being with them, maybe like in theater. I had seen some films that were inspiring, the films of Zelmir Zelnik, because he has a theater background and he makes these performative documentaries, and he also makes sort of fiction documentary hybrids. Zelmir Zelnik from Serbia, and I saw his work at the Flaherty seminar, and I thought, wow, I really can bring theater back to documentary. And also I saw the films there of Christopher Harris, and one of his films, Hell in the Fact, had an actor lip syncing the words of Zora Neale Hurston as she was talking about her anthropological research. And there was a big dissonance in the lips. They weren't in sync, and that was on purpose. And that sort of was a commentary on, like, as it took a distance from the material, and the viewer could interpret that as they wanted to. My idea was to have the lip sync be very accurate. And that's what we actually are seeing in like a lot of big budget films, is this process, but in reverse. Usually they film everything and then they have to do the dialogue afterward in I don't know if it's called dubbing, you know, or 80, there's some acronym I'm forgetting. And, you know, you watch the scene and actually you say the line just as you said it then, and then it sounds very perfect. In this film, I'm not necessarily trying to make all of that invisible. I might like it that you can tell that the audio sounds different from the room that we're in. I might like it that it sounds too perfect to be outside, that we don't hear the right atmospheric sounds at the same time.
There are also moments where we get to hear you sort of giving cues like that, breaking that wall down.
Yeah, where you like completely break the facade like entirely, you know, and you know, tell the person in front of you, we'll see you next week, thanks so much. Like,
yeah, and like I love how people like speak to each other. Like right now we're like, hi, how are you? I'm so glad to be here. And just like that type of performance that we do every day, that is like so bizarre if you look at it like from the outside. And I love that's playing with that. It's like a certain type of music you can use in everyday language. So this like moment when we're all saying thank you to Sumaya, who had been playing Jalen, it's like an exaggeration of that sort of politeness. It's and like thank you so much. But I don't want it to be too exaggerated. Like I wanted to ride that line. And also, when I'm interrupting as a director, I'm very romantic. So I'm like loving Jalen's words. I love it when she says, always create when you have inside. And I want that to make me cry. At the same time, I also want to have a bit of playfulness and humor about it. I want to distance. I'm so romantic, but I'm also ironic. Like it's fun to do both at the same time. So we get this like totally emotional, we can feel these emotions, and then we can also sort of laugh at ourselves a little bit too for just how touched and moved we are. So Jalen really tells that story like so perfectly and so beautifully and so optimistically too. You know, and every person in here is telling their own point of view. So, you know, someone else might say, well, Coretta Scott King, you know, that wasn't a happy story. She actually left Antioch College eventually, and she transferred to another college, you know, because of the schools not accepting her to teach there for her co-op. Co-op means internship. It's like a work study program. But in this film, each actor is telling their own story, and it's not a historian's film. It's not a comprehensive history. So we have to accept all of the inaccuracies of that person's point of view. In oral history, you, as I understand it, you're focused on people and their firsthand accounts, and you have these raw, unedited interviews that you can use for research. In this case, it's not research, it's very constructed. I mean, maybe I could, like, if people agreed, we could make them available, I don't know, but that's not really what's interesting to me. But Jalen's thing is unedited. Those are the stories just as she told them, because she was that good of a storyteller. And you know, if somebody says, oh no, this is what happened, or it was this year, or it was that age, maybe that doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, you know, something that really resonated with me, or that I kind of captured, was this like constant renegotiation of like reality, and that you kind of like throw at the viewer to kind of decide, you know, to kind of pick and choose, like when you're, you know, listening to the differentiation between the audio, and you're, you know, you're kind of wondering, like, is that, like, I can't tell, or like, is this a real story? Like, okay, there's things that kind of add up, but I'm not totally sure. And I think that is kind of it kind of makes you question other like understandings of like, you know, truth and modalities and things like that are a part of it. I thought it was really, compelling.
Yeah, I like that at first people don't know necessarily that that's not Sumaya's voice. They've seen a clue. They've seen, well, she couldn't have been alive in the years it says that she's in Yellow Springs, but I didn't want to give her the ID just yet, saying it was Sumaya. And in fact, in earlier versions of the film, we don't see that it's, you know, we don't see their names at all until the credits, Sumaya or Rukia's names until the credits. And that to me was very normal because every other film I've made is a fiction film and I'm always directing actors and they play someone else and you're not like seeing the actor's name, right? But somebody pointed out that they are residents of Yellow Springs and that's interesting as another layer of the film, right?
Yeah.
And you know, how long have they been in Yellow Springs? We don't have a full interview with them. Maybe we could do one, you know, maybe that could be, you know, something that is incorporated somewhere as a standalone piece or whatever. But so I did finally, thanks to the great feedback, put in the IDs, but I didn't give it away at the beginning, right? It's at the end of Sumaya's talk, and I want there to be like little clues that sort of
that definitely contributes to the sort of like layering quality that you've mentioned, and also the challenging of like sort of traditional documentary work, because I'm thinking about, you know, like historical documentary where we're aware of the ID of the character that we're exploring, but obviously if there's a reenactment scene or something, we don't learn those actors' names as we watch that scene. But this sort of like, it makes you think about who are these other people who are helping tell this story, which is still the focus. Can you talk about how you found those actors and what that was like?
Yeah, well, Jalen, I did the interview and I tried to explain the film project, but it's like really hard to explain and sometimes I'm not that good at explaining things. So she didn't quite see that because, I mean, I also said, you know, you can do this audio interview and that's all it is. And that's what she was into. So I found out she didn't want to act in a film, you know, and a lot of the other chapters actually are different from this in that they're the same person's audio is the same person re-performing themselves. So that's very different. But I knew that I was interested at some point in the film of contrasting the voices and the bodies, not only in time, not only in the choreography, but in the matching of the body to the voice themselves, in this case, in age, or, you know, whatever. Maybe there's some other aspect of our physique that gives away our voices. So when she told me that she didn't want to act in the film, but that I could use the audio interview and that, you know, that was all good, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to do that I had that idea that I had. So the first actor, Sumaya, she was like 17 when we shot this last year, and Jalen is talking about her mom, who's 16. And then Rue was 10 or 11, maybe a little older, and Jalen was talking about when she was 10 in that story at the Martin Luther King interview. So I wanted there to be an association between the two. Now, as you point out, it's different from a reenactment at least in the first one, right? Because she's actually acting as if she's being interviewed, not like acting through, well, she's obviously telling the story, so that would be weird. But so yeah, so there are those layers too. Yeah. And at the beginning, you hear Sumaya. You don't hear Sumaya's voice. You hear Jalen's voice, the person whose story this is, and you just hear Sumaya's voice a tiny bit, and then Rue comes, and occasionally you hear Rue saying Jalen's words instead of Jalen. And by the end of the sequence, they're actually speaking in a chorus. And so I think that sort of is parallel to the story being passed down through the generations. You know, it's originally Jalen's story, and now it's being embodied, or it's being recited together with this younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, they still haven't met. So I'm hoping that they meet really soon.
Any of the three? The Jalen, Sumaya, and
No, so Sumaya used to babysit Rue. I found out later, like I had no idea. But, yeah, I could show like some artwork of Sumaya's. Should I do that now? And
yeah.
So I was looking for these actors, and my friend Felicia, I was asking her, and she was like, well, here are my nieces. And I pitched it to them, and very bad pitch, I think I usually do. But anyway, Sumaya still looked really interested, and like her little sister was like, whatever. And so then I had actually already seen her in a film called Little Village, which a friend of mine in town is making, and it's like a series, which I recommend following up on if you're interested in the village. And I saw that she was a really great actor. And then I think she showed me her Instagram, or I looked at it, and the work was really great. And I'm about to show you some of her artwork. And then Rue, I saw some of her TikTok videos. And I was like, whoa, this kid is the right one. So let me present screen.
You want to hop into a screen share now?
Yeah, should I do that? Or
Yeah.
should I wait?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Here we go. Oh, I didn't do share sound. Let me see.
Oh, and also people can follow along in if they'd like to. Should we put that in the chat?
Oh yeah, have we dropped the link into the chat?
Yeah, I think that Maya dropped a link to the whole slideshow in the chat, because with videos on streaming on top of Zoom, it always looks super choppy and bad. But if you click on the link yourselves and open it in your own window at home, it won't look choppy and bad.
Yeah, Natalie has just put it in there at the bottom, so if anyone wants to open in a different tab, they can do so.
So I'm just gonna play it, and you can either watch it on your own or watch it here. Let's see. This is Rue's song. Ice on my neck, doesn't come. I'm a pretty boy, I'm stunning. So yeah, so that was a modern day Rue's TikTok. A year ago, there were different ones, but she's already deleted them. And like some of them, she would like change her clothes colors from one shot to the next. And it was like, and some had like really cool movements. So I knew that Rue would be a great fit. And then Sumaya, I'm like, she's like this incredible artist. And she even has paintings at the fire department. No, the police department, the fire department, I don't know. She's like commissioned for work and stuff. So you can see this is some of her artwork.
Wow.
So this is her Instagram, if anyone wants to check it out, chappelle.art.
And she was a high school student when you guys got connected?
Yeah, I think she's a senior now, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, she went to Costa Rica briefly earlier this year. And yeah, Sumaya and I will hopefully see each other very soon at a distance, wearing masks.
Yeah, these are really cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this kind of brings up an interesting part of this, is that this town has this relationship to the college too, that I'm sure like has a big, you know, thumbprint on the town's identity. Or, I mean, the fact that she's been asked also to be in other like films, and she's in high school, and I feel like that's, you know, that's not, that's very special, you know?
Yeah, it's a really small town. It's so small, in fact, that it's called a village, because it's 3,000 people or less is a village. So yeah, it is super small, and the Antioch College is like, it used to be really well known. And I remember my grad school advisor said he was choosing between Antioch College and Harvard. And Antioch was his first choice, but he decided to go to Harvard for some other reason. And it was really a center of civil rights movements and progressive movements. They're the ones who, like, they say they started the Me Too movement back in the like 90s, and SNL made fun of them. So like any college town, there's this interesting relationship between the villagers themselves and the people who are directly associated with the college. And in the case of Antioch, it's a pretty fluid relationship. I mean, sometimes I've heard people say that they don't know the college, that the college students don't go out that much. But I know that like one of Sumaya's grandparents or great uncles taught music at Antioch for many years. What other connections? Oh, and Sumaya's aunt was an Antioch student. So yeah, there are always big connections.
I know that I know that the relationship between the people in the village and students and faculty at the college is really explored in the third sequence. Did you want to show a clip of that as well while we're in this?
Yeah, sure. Are you still seeing that screen that I had? I like just
we are
from it by accident, and now I need to bring it back. Let's see, what did I do?
You could always quit the screen share and start again if that works better for you.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, here is another clip from another part of the film, another chapter in the film, and this one is starring, well, this is the interviewee performing himself, Charles Arthur Williams, and he's a breakdancer. And he's actually talking explicitly about his relationship to the college as a villager through this really awesome thing they had in the early 2000s called the Midwest Hip Hop Convergence. So now I will move this thing and present that.
Chuck, could you get into your first freeze?
Let me make one thing clear, okay? You never know who's going to teach you something, you know?
Right.
You never know who's going to be that person to give you a key to unlock some things, you know? Now, the mentality of Antioch was they're dirty, you know, they don't care about just what we cared about, you know. They're dirty, they stink, they party, you know. And that was the mentality given to us that had no idea what this place was really about. So I started coming around to see for myself.
Yeah. So I could show you the next clip if you want, which is just a 1.5-minute excerpt of sequence 6, Jalen Rowe's story that we're all talking about, just to refresh your memories. Is this a good time to play that, or do you want to talk about Chuck's first?
I have a quick question about Chuck's, and then I'd love to jump into the clip from sequence 6. But how are you using IDing for the sequences that have the same person voicing their story, their own story?
Just the same way that it says like Jalen at the beginning when it was Sumaya, but it's actually that same person. So it says their name. It says, it was a question like, you know, how much information to put in. I think the most important thing is that we know that they're a resident of the village and maybe how much time or what years they were a resident there. You know, there was one point where I thought, well, maybe I should say like what they do or, you know, something about them or what year they were born. But right now, all of that is out and it's their own name. Yeah.
Well, and how did you meet Chuck? I'm curious to see like how all these stories kind of.
Yeah.
Well,
I one time actually in Philly, I studied breakdancing for about a year. And so I was really into breaking and I was learning a bit about the history of hip hop. And when I came to Yellow Springs, I think I actually asked around, like, you know, are there any breaking lessons or is there anyone around here that does? And there's this awesome bar, like dive bar called The Gulch. And that was like the second time I met him and we had a little conversation. And then I think we like exchanged contact information like the way you do when you're new at a place. And, you know, I called him or texted him, or maybe one day I even saw him at the bar and asked, you know, would you be interested in doing this? And I think it would be really awesome with your breaking moves. And it was super awesome rehearsing with Chuck because he was really committed to the rehearsal process. And we would go and he would try different moves and we didn't know if he was going to be like moving while he spoke or if he was going to be in a freeze. And we finally decided that he would be in these freezes when he was lip syncing his own previous interview, excerpts of his own previous interview.
Yeah, those freezes are such powerful editing cues. Like it really grabs you in the right way in accordance with what he's talking about. I was just thinking about all these different stories and your process of sort of like finding people through these different social means. And did you have like a sort of criteria or some sort of like editing guideline for yourself about what stories felt most relevant or how, I mean, because I guess the sort of umbrella is the history of the town, but how did you sort of figure out like which stories were most important to tell within that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, both like before I found the interviewees and afterward. I was like, I guess sometimes as artists, like sometimes we start out like really broadly, like we don't know what we're doing and it can feel like really risky and that's kind of exciting too. But on the other hand, like I did have this one specific concept, which was the lip syncing and the listening. Should I stop screen share or no, I'll just talk about this. So I, in some ways, wasn't sure. I knew that I was mostly interested in like women and people of color, and I tend to try to like represent people that are less represented in mainstream media. And it was originally, I think I even had one that was gonna be like all women and queer people. But then basically Chuck and Shane were so amazing that I definitely had to include them. But like I knew that I wanted some people that had like these really crazy stories. I mean, I would say Jalen is one of them. Another crazy story belongs to Karen McKee, who 6 generations ago, her ancestors were freed from slavery. And there's a really interesting story about how their slaver actually, like the slaver's son, actually like set them up in the village. And so then there are other people who it's like, maybe they came 2 years ago. Like I was thinking like, you could do this for every single person in the village. And that would be a really interesting film if it's like, you know, hundreds of hours and every single person in the village that, you know, maybe that could happen one day. But I think I wanted it to be a mixture. And sometimes you don't know why something is more interesting. I think one thing is there were a couple stories that were super good, but they were very, very Antioch focused. like somebody who had been teaching at Antioch, and that's why they came. And I was more interested in Yellow Springs, the village, and it could tie to Antioch, but it should be like only about Antioch. So I think that was part of what informed my decision. I did 12 like hour to hour and a half long interviews, 12 of them, and I chose about 7. And I went to the 365 Projects meeting. That's a group dedicated to exploring African-American history in Yellow Springs 365 days a year. What else? I asked around, you know, I asked people who I knew, that kind of thing. Yeah. So is now a good time for me to show an excerpt of the film we just, Sequence 6?
Yeah, good.
Do it.
Antioch has always been a part of our life, my mother's life, my grandmother's life, and we theirs. I think we started the unofficial Town and Gown program way back in the 40s and 50s. But my mother was the first employee of Renee's laboratory when she was 16 years old.
Yeah, I'm so in love with Sumaya's performance of that, and she like just how well she played this interviewee character. And then I think that like Rue has this like mysterious quality, the way like you see her from behind and then you see her feet and she like gets into these poses, and so there's like a contrast there and a different approach. So yeah, I'm like so tickled with how they did those performances. And it took a while for Sumaya and I to get to that place. We would be at these rehearsals and, you know, nothing was really happening. I wasn't sure, had no idea. And then I don't even remember, you know, when it sort of came together and we're like, oh, okay, this is how it's working. So, yeah, do you want me to talk more about the process or?
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'd love to hear more about this process, because I feel like it kind of like happened like as it was like it wasn't totally planned out. It seems like, I think it's pretty incredible when things kind of just land, you know.
Yeah, but then you have to like make the time for that to happen, right? Like if we just started shooting and we improvised it, we would have gotten all the bad stuff like during the rehearsals. Like you have to weed through like all of the bad art, right? And then you're like, oh, okay, this works after like the 10th try at like trying to see something that's interesting. Yeah. So, and I really enjoyed doing the interviews, and I made sure that I wasn't interrupting the person, and they would just, I'd be like, okay, can you tell me the story of, and they would talk for 15, I'd be like, can you talk about 10, 15, 20 minutes, or we'd have even a time, and we would have already decided what stories they were gonna tell in a pre-interview on the phone where we just thought what might be interesting. And then they came into the studio, thanks to WYSO and Basim Blunt, shout out to Basim Blunt and Nina Ellis for letting us use these amazing recording studios. And I had some notes of like, oh, can you tell me that story? and I would never like interrupt them unless like there was some technical thing I had to stop. And I loved that. It's like sometimes for some reason, like when you're having a conversation and it's a one-sided conversation, you're like, this is annoying. Like, don't you want to know about me? But if it's like supposed to be that way, it's fascinating. Like to just be the listener.
Sounds like probably too you were able to like sort of focus more, keep things more straightforward without also filming people, and that whole awareness on both ends, like for you figuring out, you know, if the frame's still good, and for them thinking about how they look, to keep it separate seems like probably offered a lot more like comfortability too.
And to just listen, yeah.
Yeah, you're mentioning the two things, like one, that technically I'd have a lot more on my mind. And then two, like you said, they'd be more aware of the camera, more self-conscious, like maybe performing a little more. I mean, Jalen tells this really succinct story and I was like, whoa, that was fast. Do you want to slow down? She was like, I tell my stories fast. And then I was like, oh, actually, this is really good. Because like in the other interviews, people are like saying a lot and there are long silences. And I thought, well, this is juicy. This is material I can use. I like all these imperfections. I like all this stream of consciousness way of talking, the weird ways that we speak verbally versus like something that's written. So I thought I saw that all as material, and I knew that when they re-performed these weird ums and ahs and strange ways of talking, that would create a contrast too with the tight choreography. But with Jalen's, it already was very tight. So I think then bringing in younger actors and their performances then adds a new layer.
Totally. I can't believe it, but I feel like we're already getting really close to the questions time.
Oh yeah, it is. It's 5:44.
But is there anything else you sort of want to talk about before we open it up?
Well, I want to thank the Yellow Springs Community Foundation for giving a $5,000 grant to support the production. And I want to thank the Wexner Center for letting me have a residency there that's helping with the edit. Some amazing editors there. One of them who's Alexis McCrimmon, who's actually an alum. And thank Antioch for fiscally sponsoring. I mean, there's so many people to thank, I'm not gonna get through them now. Shout out to Chandra Jones, the sound recordist. I already mentioned Matt Morgan, the producer, Elena Dahl, cinematographer associate. Producer, anyway, yeah.
It takes a village of Yellow Springs in this case.
Wow, okay. I think we have some questions. We start, there was one, trying to sort through them. Okay. Question for later from John. I would enjoy hearing Catalina talk about reenactment and how she's using it. She talked about lip syncing as a relatively common practice in film, music videos, of course. And I wonder whether the obvious disjunction between voice and person in her film, children speaking aligns with adults, which brings Jillian's wearing 1 to 2 to mind, means to alert us both to the impositions of technique, not as a transparent access to the truth of these events, and to the importance of legacy. The speaker is telling the story of being a child, and she's being voiced by children. And if both, it was helpful that I'm narrating this, and if both, the how might be the former affect of the latter. In other words, how does the estrangement serve or challenge the affirmation of legacy?
Sort of like the holiness of what is being said, maybe? Sort of like the importance of the legacy, the story, and like sort of leaving it without these informal interruptions. I think that's what John is referring to. And that was the question. And Elena Dahl, the associate producer, was like, I really don't like it when we hear the director's voice and when you say thank you. And it's really like bothers me, and I just want to hear Jalen's story. Now I also listened, like got feedback from like many different people, and I think that I want to present this story, but like I said, I want the romance of it to be there, but I also want to poke holes in it. And it's, I guess it's not my style to not interrupt the narrative a little bit. So, I mean, it's sort of a motif of mine. And how does that, maybe the question isn't, you know, like, well, why did you decide? It's like, of course, that's my style, I would use it, but is how does that serve or challenge the affirmation of legacy? And I guess, you know, Jalen's story is one of the stories. It's a very positive story. There are other people who have more negative versions of this story. I'm not, you know, saying them, they're not being interviewed, but we can think about this story as one story, a construct. I don't know if it's a construct, but a performance. A story is a performance in a way. Jalen was delivering a wonderful performance in her storytelling. And so affirm or challenge the affirmation of legacy. Yeah, I mean, that is the challenge with this piece, is like, how dare you interrupt this beautifully perfect story, right? But I guess, you know, Jalen's gonna write a book, and in that case, it won't be, you know, it will be her style. I'll have to think about that. I think that's such a good question. Yeah, maybe we can come back to that if I think of anything else. Question two, oh, sorry, you're gonna read the questions.
Oh, I'm kind of lost in the questions. Maya, did you see another one?
So we have a question from Daniel. It says, are Sumaya and Rue going to be in other sections of the film?
They appear, well, Rue, there's, at the beginning of the film, we see briefly like a hint of what's to come. And so Rue originally was one of the very first images in the whole film, because she's looking out the window and she's seeing someone filming someone else. So it's already sort of self-reflective. She's watching the process of filming, but she's also inviting us to be curious about what's going on here. She's looking and we're looking at what she's looking at. We're also wondering what's going on here. So I loved this image of her wondering, and I love having it that at the very beginning of the film, and then at the very end of the film, we come and we're like, oh, that's what that was. That's who she was. And we get a few other interweavings, and Sumaya does appear at another point in the film and even has a conversation with other interviewees that is totally spontaneous and totally unlip synced. There's like this little get together. So yeah.
I wanted to ask about that last shot, because it's like kind of iconic. It's like just really powerful imagery of the two girls running into the field, and it feels so final. It really, like, it's the last shot of the sequence clearly, but unless this is the last scene in the film, I imagine there's something else that comes after that. I just kind of like wonder about that transition, and also about your choice in including that shot and in filming that sequence in the field, because it's kind of separate from the rest of the settings.
Yeah, I guess I like how it explodes, like the way that music videos explode, or like musicals explode, like all of a sudden people are dancing and it's gone to like a whole other dimension. And originally we tried shooting that shot in a more reasonable location. It was like they were just holding hands walking down a nice neighborhood street, and it was like, no, this has to be like a field. And I know how like overly romantic and melodramatic that is, and I love it at the same time. So it's like taking the hallmark card even further, but you're like really moved. And like Martin Luther King is so famous, and yet he's so moving, and he was famous for a reason. He would actually interrupt a conversation with grown folks to talk to a little girl, and tell her, you know, how important it was that she creates what she had inside. And I think like I'm always like touched by little girls. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be like an actress, and yeah, it would be a great thing if I can help these girls create that fantasy and run through the fields. No, I mean, I'm drifting here, but
It feels really fantastical too, in the sense that you put the two, because I know it's not exactly that we're seeing Jalen at these two different ages, but in a sense that's still the vibe that you get. And so then to see two versions of the same person potentially at different ages right next to each other.
And then solidarity. It's like these women in solidarity, they're holding hands, the voice of God, like Jalen's voice of God, their voices, they're all in a chorus.
All together, yeah.
And so it's this relationship between them is broken. Like they didn't necessarily know each other, right? One of them came in the room, left, the other one comes in, and then you see them holding hands. So it's sort of an abstraction or a mythification of what's just occurred, and also maybe an image of the promise that, and the type of dreaming that these encouraging words provoked. So yeah, I also saw that John like mentions how lip syncing is common practice in film and music videos lately, and somebody's been like telling me like, oh, Sarah Cooper is doing it, and this is like a really popular thing now. And I was like, oh yeah, lip syncing is great, and like drag performers lip sync, and yeah, there's something powerful about lip syncing.
Yeah. See if we have any other questions coming up here.
Oh, there's a poll.
What does that mean?
I don't know. Is it,
That was to do with the closed captioning.
what was the closed captioning poll? Okay.
Okay, so we're just 5 minutes from the end. So now you can say whether you used the closed captioning or not.
Oh, we can't vote. Hosts and panelists can't vote.
Can't be that. Oh, it's popped up.
Yeah, host and panelists.
Yeah, so if that's popping up for everyone.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Angus. Hi, I know you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Maya and Em, too. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a really exciting conversation. And I'm assuming anyone who's watching this conversation has already watched your film, but watch it again. Watch your other work.
Yeah, and the big thing I found out is I thought it was only available till midnight, but it turns out it's available for like many weeks or maybe more than a month or something. I don't know what that is.
It'll be up through the duration of the entirety of the open video call exhibition, so well into September. Yeah.
Right.
And maybe we should just take this moment too to remind people that next week, again, we're having, weekly cycle of a video we know up on Monday, and then we'll have a conversation with the artist that Wednesday. And next week on Monday on the ICA's website, we'll be showing or premiering, or it will go live. As we said, it will stay up. Booth Carlson's Fantastic. And then she will be in conversation with Lino Kino members on Wednesday of next week.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I'll be here again next week.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. But yeah, and thank you to the ICA.
Yes, thank you, Natalie.
Thank you so much. Yeah, everyone, Natalie.
Yay. This has been such a well-organized and put together program. It's amazing.
Thank you.
All the films.
Well, thank you so much, Catalina. Amazing work. Yeah, it's
Such a pleasure talking with you.
yeah. Cool.
All righty. See ya.
Sure. Take care.